Okay. I wasn't quite sure what to title this stream in particular. Um, the in the last bit, I re-listened to the last bit of the stream, and it spoke about the people who were in Prince, who were, I don't know the term, in Prince Albert's court or working for Prince Albert. Um, and it described his. I know that the Queen has a ministry, but I don't know if the Prince has a ministry. I don't know what to call it. Prince's household. Um, Sort of going over his the money, his allowance. What is it? I don't know the term. Annuity. Um, Going over things like that. The details of what is to happen to Prince Albert. And I think before it talked about how Victoria was feeling towards Albert and how difficult it was for her to marry or to consider marriage. Um, and now I don't know where this section is going. I'm not sure what it would talk about afterwards. So then I just titled it Matrimony and Court because that's what it seemed to talk about, the marriage and the court, the royal court. That's just my word for it. But basically, the people that work with the Queen or Prince Albert. But I will go ahead and continue with the reading in a moment. Um, I'll begin where it says on Saturday. Um, let's see. Okay. On Saturday, 8th of February, Albert arrived with his brother and his father, and 2 days later, he and Victoria were married. The bride wore a white satin gown with a deep flounce of Honiton 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 lace, her Turkish diamond necklace, and a sapphire brooch that Albert had given her. It was a relief that, well, it was a relief after the coldness of the public towards her over Lady Flora's death to be cheered enthusiastically by the crowds in St. James Park, and again on the return journey from the Chapel Royal. Hmm. After the wedding breakfast, after the wedding breakfast, the bride changed into her going away dress, a white silk gown trimmed with swan's down, which she wore with a bonnet adorned with orange blossom. There was a last kind look from Lord Melbourne, as she pressed his hand in farewell. And then the young pair departed in their coach for Windsor. At last, it was I and Albert alone. They must have made a charming couple. He so tall and handsome, she so tiny, so graceful and so adoring. They were both young and had so much to learn. It was not easy to marry a queen, nor was it easy to be both a queen and a loving wife and mother before the days of female emancipation. Next morning, Victoria found time to dash off a short letter to her uncle, telling him how happy she was. The happiest being that ever existed. That's what she said. And that Albert was an angel, and his kindness and affection for me is really touching. To look into those dear eyes and that dear sunny face is enough to make me adore him. In her role as wife, Victoria found complete fulfillment. Her journal, her letters, even her public speeches abound with endearing terms. He was an angel and the fount of all wisdom. It was clear that she was deeply in love. Whether Albert was as lyrically happy as his wife proclaimed herself to be has been questioned both by contemporaries. The Duchess of Brentford thought he was not a bit in love with his wife, and the subsequent biographers, such as Lytton Strachey, it was presumptuous of either to pontificate on the subject, who, discussing the marriage of even close friends, can genuinely know their innermost and private feelings towards one another. Nevertheless, the subject continues to fascinate. On the evidence of the prince's letters to Victoria, both before and after their marriage, when for any reason they were apart, their love was mutual. Amid all the strains of their engagement, Albert wrote to her, "While I possess your love, that cannot make me unhappy." After the wedding, he wrote to his ex-tutor, "I could wish for no happier family life than has been granted to me." And later still to his brother, "I wish you could be here and see in us a couple united in love and unanimity, unanimity. Be as happy as we were, as we are. More I cannot wish for you." I'm gonna look that word up, see what that is. Let's see what that is.
Unanimity. Unanimity.
I wish I could see the I guess they don't have those anymore. Those IPA symbols, those pronunciation symbols. I like them. Agreement by all people involved. Consensus. That's what it says. And what's anonymity then? No, there's no word for it. No, there's the IPA. Um. Hmm. Oh, like the word unanimous. That's what this is like. It took some time, but I got it. I got it. And love and unanimity. Um, hmm. Continuing in the book. Let me see. Okay. What a man writes, both to his wife and to his friends, cannot always be taken as unquestioned evidence as to his inmost and often unconfessed feelings. Albert was convinced of the moral sanctity of marriage. In the letter to Ernest quoted above, he also wrote, "A married couple must be chained to one another, be inseparable, and live only for one another." His views on sexual license were strict. He had seen too much of its evils in his own home, where his father had been a libertine, his mother a neglected wife, who had finally run away with another man, and his brother, who plainly treading the same path as his father. In Albert's own case, his tutor, Leopold, and finally Stockmar, had all fostered his sense of duty to almost abnormal lengths, and undoubtedly he believed that it was a man's duty to love his wife. Moreover, in spite of her temperamental defects, Victoria was in many ways a lovable young woman. Stockmar described her as always quick and acute in her perceptions, straightforward, moreover, of a singular purity of heart, without a trace of vanity or pretension. She would consequently do full justice to the prince's head and heart. Predisposed as Albert was to be a devoted husband, Victoria's near worship of him must have made it easy for him to feel that he reciprocated her love. Hmm. Perhaps fortunately for them both, Albert was never tempted to be unfaithful, even in his heart, to his marriage vows. He was a man more at home in the company of fellow men than in that of women, who, unless they were members of his family circle, made him feel shy and ill at ease. At the same time, from his childhood, there had always been at least one woman in his life to whom he was able to turn for affection and sympathy. In his Kohlberg days, this need had been satisfied first by his grandmother and then by his stepmother. Albert was the type of man who needed a family with its relationships. It compensated him for the stiffness and reserve which, as a foreign prince and the queen's husband, he thought it necessary to preserve with all but his family and a few close friends. His domestic pleasures were simple: reading aloud or making music with Victoria in the evenings, romping with the children. That's interesting. Romp. Um, Certainly, there's a phrase to have a good romp, or well, that's romping with the children. Certainly, like that. That sounds like it's it's quite quaint. I like that word, romping. But romping with the children does sound like a band name or something. um, it's just one of those things, right, where people say, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a band name." But anyways, okay. Going on family expeditions in the summer. Okay. Tobogganing and skating in the winter. He was nearly drowned when the ice gave way one February morning when he was skating in the ornamental water at Buckingham Palace. He loved all the activities that go to make a family life, and it is to him that modern generations of children owe the pleasures of Christmas tree with its presents. Okay. Though not the first to introduce the practice, Albert imported this custom from his homeland and made it popular. He was a family man, too, in that he enjoyed enlarging and rebuilding the family home and laying out its gardens. Gradually, he imbued Victoria with his tastes. Though she continued to love and often visit the theater, and together they created a happy family environment in their two most personal homes, Osborne and Balmoral. Hmm. There is no evidence to suggest that Albert married a different woman. He would have ever have been capable of the passionate emotion and jealous devotion that devoured Victoria. He told his brother that he was willing to give up everything for Victoria, and he certainly worked himself into an early grave as a result of his unremitting labors on her behalf in her capacity as queen. Though whether this was due to love or duty, who can say? He certainly gave her every token of tenderness. Victoria, after his death, was to recall how during her confinements, no one else ever lifted her from her bed to her sofa, and he always helped to wheel her on her bed or sofa into the next room. For this purpose, he would come instantly when sent for from any part of the house. As the years went on, and he became overwhelmed with work, this was often done at much inconvenience to himself, but he never ever came he never he but he ever came with a sweet smile on his face. Throughout his life, he never failed Victoria, except that by wearing himself out in her service and the service of duty, he left her to face 40 years of widowhood. Hmm. So that is a uh, maybe perhaps in those words there's a truth to those words, perhaps. Maybe. I'm reading this section. It says the family home, the royal family at home. Tobogganing. I wonder what tobogganing is. That sounds quite curious. One of the German customs which the prince imported was to have a tree at Christmas. This custom was adopted by thousands of families, and the Christmas tree has now become a part of English tradition. Hmm, that's interesting. I wonder when the Christmas tree became an American thing. I'd, I'd like to know when that happened. I wonder how big their tree was. Must have been a. It looks like this is the Christmas tree right here. It's quite small. It looks like it's on a table as well. I'll make a note of it in my little notepad. Hmm. It seems like the little picture at the bottom left, is a photograph from 1860. That's what the tree looked like. But I don't know what to make of it. The little section I read right there where it says, except that by wearing himself out in her service and the service of duty, he left her to face 40 years of widowhood. I suppose the most apparent thing to take away from that is that humans are mortal creatures. We only live for so long. But I suppose then you can continue to say was that um, it's quite a difficult thing to to speak on. Is um, speaking of Albert, in this description, he certainly cared for Victoria, um, but by wearing himself out, he didn't live as long. But if he didn't extend himself so much, would he have been able to care in the capacity that he wanted to? Um, Obviously, we want to live as long as obviously most people want to live as long as possible. Um, there are some people, of course, who don't want to see old age. Um, some people who um, are quite fine with, um, let's say, uh, going away at a young age. Um, but it's to me it stands out, this this fact about Albert's life. It does stand out for me. I'm getting a message in the Discord. I'll give it my thumbs up. I'll continue with the book. Um, I'll continue. The section goes on for quite a bit. It does go on. I don't think I'll finish the section today. I could come back and finish it on Monday, and then on next Wednesday, I'll start the new section. But continuing the book. Albert and Victoria were only 20 when they married, and Albert and Victoria were only 20 when they married, and, like many other young couples, they found the process of adjusting to the new relationship at times difficult. They did not know one another very well, and their tastes were dissimilar. He was studious, enjoying the society of scientists and intellectuals. He loved the country, and he liked to go to bed early. Victoria, on the other hand, was a town dweller, enjoying the bustle of London, with its theatres and concerts, parties and balls, and liked to go to bed late and get up late in the morning. She was partial to gossip rather than to serious conversation, which in her young days she felt put her at a disadvantage, and in general, on domestic evenings, preferred merry games or Melbourne's funny, often perverse and outrageous views that he tailored to her needs and inclinations. At first, it was Albert who was expected to make the adoption, though Victoria did learn to play chess. But fortunately, the young couple shared some taste. They were both musical, though even here, the Queen preferred Italian composers, while her husband leaned to the German. It looks like these are photographs, these pictures. Photographs. Hmm. Says in the middle it says, one interest that Victoria and Albert shared was love of theater, and special command performances were presented to them at Windsor and Buckingham Palace. Later, the royal children often produced tableaux and small plays to perform before their parents. Above left decorated programmed command of the command performance of Twelfth Night, directed by Charles Keane and performed at Windsor Castle. Right, it says lithograph of the Royal Command performance. Hmm. It must be. I'm thinking, and I am thinking that it must be interesting to be an historian and to sort of piece together the puzzle. Though I suppose, like with anything, it does take time, and I'm not necessarily one to solve puzzles. I don't necessarily like puzzles. Um, but it is interesting to see everything come together. And I think Dorothy does do a good job at this, the author. Albert, continuing in the book at the top, Albert was a beautiful dancer with whom the Queen could waltz with complete propriety. They both enjoyed riding and were devoted to their dogs. Victoria was always adoring to her collection, while Albert's favorite was his hound Eros, and great was the woe when it was accidentally shot on a shooting expedition, though luckily it recovered. In a letter to Victoria, expressing his great joy at the news of their engagement, Leopold told his niece that in Albert she would find a husband whose qualities were those she would find most conducive to her happiness. The future was to show that he was right. It was on Albert's reserve of patience, self-control, and deep affection that their future happiness was to be built. Once Lord Melbourne, taken to the Queen about her uncle Leopold and his first wife, the Princess Charlotte, told her that he had acquired great influence by being very quiet and patient. In time, Albert acquired the same influence by the same methods, and Victoria came to idolize her husband. Many years later, writing to her eldest daughter, the Crown Princess of Prussia, the Queen told her, "I should often like to fall at his feet, for I feel how unworthy I must be one of so great and so perfect as he." Though Victoria had always adored her husband, that did not necessarily make her easy to live with, a fact of which she was all too conscious herself. Though Victoria was physically robust, she was often excitable and irritable, and suffered from moods of nervous depression, as she also possessed a hot and passionate temper. When she flew into rage on one of her bad days, she was quite capable of hurling accusations and suspicions at her dear angel, though she bitterly regretted the outbursts later. Um, she bitterly regretted them. At times, she was almost hysterical, and both because she and her contemporaries believed her that her grandfather, George III, had died insane, a diagnosis which modern doctors have questioned. She was haunted by the fear that if pushed too far, her reason might go. Albert, her doctors, and uh, many of her ministers also shared this fear, which made them doubtably apprehensive of her sudden rages. Though their marriage, throughout their marriage, there must have been times when Albert's patience was sorely tired. He probably never quite understood her need for some outlet of her nervous tension. Throughout, ah, now this one says though, okay, that he did not, though he did his best to help her control her outbursts. I must say outbursts. Though he did his best to help her control her outbursts. Employing something of the technique of a father towards a beloved but difficult child, though to the end of her life, the Queen at times suffered from nervous exhaustion and the irritability that went with it. Her worship of her husband, for such it almost became, enabled her to adapt her way of life to his, except when they had company or public engagements. The royal couple retired to bed at 10. The Queen rapidly came, like her husband, to prefer the informal life of Osborne and Balmoral to the etiquette of Buckingham Palace, and even Windsor. On matters of morals, the Queen also came to accept her husband's stricter standards in place of the tolerant ones that she imbibed under the tutelage of Melbourne. In every way, Victoria became the very model of a Victorian wife. Okay. I wonder what a Victorian wife is. This is actually the first time that I think it is the first time that Victorian is used in the book. The word Victorian. Okay. The first the first months of their marriage gave less promise of happiness, largely because Victoria could not forget that she was the queen. Albert had not been allowed to decide even the length of his own honeymoons, although admittedly the matter had been settled by correspondence before she had once more gazed into those dear, dear eyes. When he had suggested a longer period of relaxation after their marriage, Victoria had brought him to heel with a sharp, though affectionately couched, reminder that she was the sovereign, she was the sovereign, and could not be away from London for more than 2 to 3 days. And she was always uneasy when she was not there to see and hear what was going on. This point of view stands in sharp contrast to her years of seclusion at Osborne in the early days of her widowhood. Hmm. Once back in London, the prince found himself excluded from all the business of government. The queen still saw her ministers alone. This was perhaps some justification for her caution. Before the marriage, there had been a widely expressed fear that her husband, a mere German princeling, might try to interfere in British politics, and it had been made very clear to Albert that this must never happen. In May, he wrote to a friend, Prince Lowenstein, that though he was very happy, he found himself in a difficult position because I am only the husband and not the master of the house. There was nevertheless one sphere in which Albert could make himself master in his own house, and which would appeal to a man of his orderly mind. In running the royal household, administrative chaos and financial incompetence reigned supreme. In the running of the royal household, administrative chaos and financial incompetence reigned supreme. Three great officers of state were responsible for running of the palace: the Lord Steward, the Lord Chamberlain, and the Master of the House of the Horse. Master of the Horse. Each independent of one of the other, and none with a deputy resident in the palace. The result was a nightmare of demarcation and the restrictive practices which would make the most hidebound trade union look like a model of rational administration. For instance, Lord Stewart was responsible for providing the fuel and laying the fires, but it was the duty of the Lord Chamberlain to light them. The Lord Chamberlain provided the lamps, but the Lord Stewart was responsible for their cleaning, trimming, and lighting. The result was that the domestic staff were undisciplined, the palace badly run, and the bills enormous. To cleanse this Augean stable was a formidable task, for everyone, from the highest to the lowest, had a vested interest in the status quo. For 3 years, the prince battled on, but by 1844, the departments finally agreed to the appointment of a master of the household, who, by coordinating everything under his own control, was able to produce efficiency and economy out of chaos. If later the Queen was to make considerable savings out of her civil list, it must be remembered that, without the reforms which Prince Albert initiated, this would not have been possible, and the squandering of public money would have gone on. This is the last page. I can read it. I'll go ahead and read it and end the stream here. By the time that this particular and self-appointed task had been successfully completed, the prince's influence over the queen was such that he no longer needed to find spheres of activity outside the realm of public affairs. For this, he was to some extent, in his early days of his marriage, indebted to George Anson, whose appointment as his private secretary he had so resented before his marriage. A genuine friendship soon developed between the two men, and they were able to discuss the position in which the prince found himself with Lord Melbourne, who was still very much in the Queen's confidence. When he in turn raised the matter with Victoria, she excused herself by saying that when she was with the prince, she preferred to talk about things other than public business. Indeed, her attitude was similar to that of a man who did not want to bring his business concerns into his domestic life, but to leave them at the office. Lord Melbourne, who understood the Queen very well by then, was somewhat skeptical of this excuse, and suspected that her reluctance sprang, at least in part, from a fear that she and her husband might have differences of opinion. Baron Stockmar, when he discussed the situation with Melbourne, was even more forthright, and in his opinion, Victoria was still more under Lazen's influence than she cared to admit, and that some jealousy in that quarter prevented the Queen from finding in her husband as fully as she might. When the queen's first pregnancy became known, the prince's position began to improve, partly because Victoria felt less inclined for business, and partly because in July, Parliament, mindful of Princess Charlotte's death soon after childbirth, voted that if the queen should be succeeded by an infant, then the regency should be vested in Prince Albert. Okay. Who is Princess Charlotte? I wonder. That was mentioned before. Hmm. Well, I guess we'll get to it later, but I might have to look for it. Princess Charlotte. Hmm. I guess I'm forgetting. But I guess that's a step up. It's certainly a step up. The regency should be vested in Prince Albert. Um, yeah, so I guess things were improving for Albert. He's getting to do more things in the royal court. Court is not an official term, that's just my word for it. In September, he was sworn into the Privy Council, and henceforth was bound by his oath. In the same month, he was busily employed in studying the laws and constitution of England, and by the spring of 1841, he was able to tell his father that I studied the politics of the day with great industry. I speak quite openly with the ministries on all subjects, and I endeavor quietly to be of as much use to Victoria in her position as I can. A little later, the Queen, writing to Leopold, told him that Albert is indeed a great comfort to me. He takes the greatest possible interest in what goes on, feeling with me and for me, and yet abstaining as he ought from biasing me either way. Though we talk much on the subject, and his judgment is, as you say, good and calm. Nevertheless, there were still problems ahead. Victoria's obstinacy, combined with her loyalty to Lazen and Sir James Clark, led to a blazing quarrel between her and Albert over the management of the royal nursery. The little princess, Victoria, known as Pussy among the family in her early days, had been born in 1840, but was a puny child and failed to thrive. The prince blamed both Lazen and Clark for what he considered to be the gross mismanagement of the royal nursery. Since his marriage, he had bolted up his resentment of the Baroness. His influence over his wife he thought too great and also undesirable. Finally, he lost his temper with the thoroughness that only a patient person, driven too far, can do. Victoria's response was to fly into one of her rages, upbraiding her husband with reproaches of every kind. Finally, horrified by the breach that seemed to be opening between them, the invaluable Stockmar was dragged in to pick up the pieces. He made both the Queen and the Baroness realize that it would be better for Lazen to retire to Germany, and she did in September. It was the end of a long relationship. For some time, her position had been a difficult one, and she found herself more and more supplanted in the affections of the girl whom she had brought up, and who had once worshipped her. It was natural that Lazen should cling to the old relationship, and equally natural that Albert should resent it. Moreover, in some ways, the Baroness had been less than wise. With her departure, the last obstacle to a full and happy understanding between husband and wife was removed. The difficulties of the first 2 years were over, and Victoria had learned to combine the roles of mother, wife, and queen. Albert was not only master in his own house, he was rapidly becoming the grey eminence behind the throne in politics also. Hmm. Well, that's it. That's the section. Um, I guess. Hmm. I wonder what the matter with the royal nursery was. Hmm. I guess it is as it says. Um, but I wonder what failed to thrive means. Um, I suppose they'll. I wish there was more of a section with the children. I don't think there is a section with the children. Just little things here and there, like this little portrait here. Oh yeah, my loan expired. I'll have to reload the page to see what the sections are. Meaning the family life. Okay, so I'll probably learn about the children more here. Well, that's it. That's the end of the reading. I did go through the whole section, courtship and marriage. Next is the queen, the prince, and the politicians. So, sort of going into little bit more of what was being hinted at the end of the courtship and marriage section is that Prince Albert is starting to become part of the court. I suppose that's my word for it. I really don't know what else to call it. Yeah, and the Queen is moving on to the next stage in her life. That's what it sounds like. Um, I'm always a bit I don't want to call Victoria the Queen because I feel like to say the Queen would be referring to the Queen that's alive when that's not what I'm doing. I don't want to call her Queen Victoria because she's not the Queen right now, but she was the Queen. I don't know if it's entirely accurate to call Victoria Queen Victoria if she isn't the Queen right now. Um, but Victoria is moving on to the next stage in her life. That's what it sounds like. But that's the end of the stream. And I guess since I was able to read the section, I won't stream on Monday. But I'll stream next Wednesday. And thank you for watching or listening if you did. And I will continue to read the book until I'm done. And so far, uh, it's been interesting. It's been enjoyable. I like this book. I like the writing in this book. Um, yeah. Well, that's it. Uh, farewell. Uh, hope you have a good day.